What is going on, everybody? It's Conley here, Science Nights in the morning, and boy, do we have a show for you today. I'm sure you've kind of read the news about the murder hornets. Well, we have a very special guest. We have the whole crew here as well, and we have Dr. Thomas Schiller, Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee, and Dr. Sean Graham here in the house. Not in the house so much from Anirban, but we have the wonders of technology to get him on the air. And Sean, will you like to introduce the special guest that you brought in today?
Yeah, we have a special guest. I was reading up on this whole thing, and I started stumbling over, what the hell's the difference between a hornet and a wasp and a bee, and it's so confusing. And I know that there's a person out there who knows this stuff like the back of her hand, recent Sul Ross graduate, Master Lauren Garrett. We're going to probably call her Master. She's just got her done with her Master's, so we'll call her Master. Lauren Garrett. And Lauren, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and maybe why you love bugs so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So the origin story of Lauren Garrett.
That's right. Yeah.
So I started my degree for my undergrad actually at a different university, and then found myself back here at Sul Ross about halfway through that process, and wasn't really sure what I was interested in. I knew I wanted to do biology, but I wasn't sure what. And so I got the opportunity to take some really awesome summer courses. One with Dr. Graham here, his desert ecology course, which is super awesome. And then I also took a general entomology class. And so it really sparked my fascination and curiosity with insects, specifically flies. Mm-hmm. So I really like the challenge of flies. Flies are really tricky insects to identify. There's all these different parts and characters that are difficult about them. They tend to come up with their own terms for all these parts. So the typical parts that you associate with insects, there's all these other extra parts. And then dipterists, so people who study flies, like to go in and make up their own terms for all of those things.
Wow.
And
so all the same parts in a fly that would be on a bee are named different things, even though they're pretty much the same part?
Yes.
That's ludicrous.
Super confusing.
I already don't want to be an entomologist. So.
Have you ever talked with Kendall Craig?
Of course.
Yeah, he's super into that stuff.
Yeah, he's very much invertebrate biology.
Well, cool. We were talking to the right person, because that's where I was having trouble. I did some reading and but I'm kind of a vertebrate guy, so I'm glad that we brought in the heavy guns here to get us through. Maybe that's what we can start with. What's the difference between a wasp, a hornet, and a bee?
Right. So I think the first thing we should talk about is what makes something a hymenopteran.
Yes.
So a hymenopteran is the order of insects that bees, wasps, and ants belong to. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're all grouped together is because the females of hymenopterans, they have this egg-laying device called an ovipositor. All insects have some form of ovipositor, but in hymenopterans, the ovipositor is modified into a stinging apparatus, so a way to inject venom. And that's kind of what defines that group.
So instead of eggs, it's filled with venom.
Well, sometimes it's also filled with eggs.
Okay.
It can be. There's things like tarantula hawks, for example, which have actually a pore underneath their modified ovipositor. So they've actually evolved a separate spot to drop those eggs. So some, they still use the ovipositor to lay eggs, and then others, they've modified it in a different way. So
very cool. Yeah. Well, okay, I have to ask this question. Now we've talked about scorpions on a recent episode. Yeah, it was a really cool, fun episode, and we kind of broke the ice a little bit about telling stories of when we were stung.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean...
You're trying to segue this into the tarantula hawk, aren't you?
Conley's
been chomping at the bit to ask about tarantula hawks.
I love tarantula hawks. Yeah. They're so awesome.
Yeah, before Conley gets into the tarantula hawk, so it's a tarantula and a hawk. So is it like a weird hybrid? So where it has like 8 wings or something like that? I was like, what is this thing, tarantula hawk?
So he's asking if the tarantula hawk has 8 wings, or if it's a hybrid of a tarantula and a hawk
and a wasp.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool if it did. No, so all insects have 6 legs. And then most insects have 2 pairs of wings. So there's some insects that break that rule. So things like true flies, for example, have only 1 pair of wings, so 2 wings total. And that's another good thing to try to not get confused with bees and wasps, because there are some flies that tend to look a lot like types of bees and wasps. And so something you can always do is try to count the number of wings on the insect. So if you're unsure if it's something that can sting you or maybe it's just a harmless fly, you can count the wings. So flies have 2 wings, and then things like bees and wasps have 4 wings total. So that's a good way to try to mitigate just swatting things randomly.
We don't encourage that in general anyway.
I have a bug assault gun. It's a gun, but it has salt in it, and it's for the flies inside. It's really fun. Shoot salt.
You're talking to a dipterist.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
sorry about
You're
that.
insulting our guests.
I'm sorry. I wish I could, be friends with them.
But Anirban, the tarantula hawk, it's just a big wasp.
Basically,
That's called that because they go after tarantulas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not a hybrid between a tarantula and a hawk.
But we don't want to talk about tarantula hawks yet because this show is about murder hornets.
Right.
And so the big thing that's all over the news right now is that a new kind of hornet that's not native to the U.S. has turned up on our shores. It's been found.
What is a hornet?
So it's been found in Washington State. And Anirban, his first question was, what's a hornet?
Okay, so a hornet is a type of wasp.
Yeah.
And typically the hornets that we think about are things like yellow jackets, for example. So these are insects that are eusocial. So eusocial insects are those kinds of bees and wasps that form hives. So they make those hives kind of like bees do. As well as like paper wasps that form those nice cells to brood their young. So things like hornets, so things like yellow jackets, will create those hives and also tend to be very particular about defending those hives. And that's why when we think of hornets or yellow jackets, those are usually the ones we think about that are chasing after people and
really
trying to protect their brood. So,
and this new hornet is an Asian giant hornet is the common name that I guess is floating around. And then of course the media took it and turned it into the murder hornet, just like that within 5 seconds. And I guess this thing, it specializes on taking down honeybee colonies.
yeah, so what it does is it gets into the hive and it starts to decapitate the drones.
Wow.
Yeah, its major source of protein is honeybees.
Yeah, so things like hornets and these types of wasps are typically scavengers. So what they do is they go and find other insects, sometimes spiders or arthropods, and they paralyze those insects, usually with their toxins or their venom, and they shove those into their nest, and that's how they feed their young.
Right.
So these types of hornets are attacking bees, using that as their food to feed
And
their
they're
brood.
big. They're like 2 inches long.
Yes.
And they
if you
can
Google a picture of them and check them out. They look cartoon-like, honestly.
So in the places in Asia where they occur, there are like native honeybees and they're domestic honeybees, and they go in there and they can just clean out a honeybee hive because although some of the honeybees, I guess, in Asia have defenses against them.
Right. So there's a particular subspecies in Japan that has made the ability to basically form a mass around the hornet.
And then they kill them by they overheat them, right?
Right. So they kind of gyrate and they move and they create this
pretty
heat,
crazy.
and it cooks the hornet actually
right.
on the inside out.
This is something I remember from a documentary several years ago about these things that I thought was really incredible. Is as you mentioned, they invade a hive, but the coolest thing about it is you don't think of a bee as being an incredibly intelligent animal, right? Although built into them,
You don't.
I don't.
Okay.
But Lauren does.
Dinosaurs are much more intelligent, but built into their wiring is this ability to generate heat, like you said, but they know exactly when to cut it off. And that's the thing I thought was most spectacular was maybe a degree above it, and correct me if I'm wrong, would actually kill the bees. So they have to stay within this threshold of heat to kill the hornet, but not kill the other bees, which is really cool. And they just vibrate, right?
Generate
meanwhile,
heat.
the honeybees in the U.S. have no defenses against these.
No, this is one very specific subspecies in Japan that can do this.
Right. And so that's for everybody who's listening and is panicking, if you are at all. Hopefully you've listened to our show enough to not listen to anything the media says. But if you're panicking at all, I don't think nobody's concerned about these things in terms of human welfare, right? These things are not murderers of people. They're although you could potentially be killed by if enough of these stung you, just like honeybees. If enough honeybees sting you, you could die. And the sting is painful, right? It's big, it's scary, but no one's really worried about these from like a human welfare perspective. They're worried about honeybee colonies, and
John,
they are an invasive
tell,
species.
So you should always tell people this. There are more people who died actually from honeybee or hornet stings compared to people who died from like snake bites. Actually, that was very interesting.
That would be something to look
That's
into.
true. Sure. They definitely do. So bee stings kill more people than snakes every year in the U.S. And that's not to say that the Asian giant hornet is going to add to that list. And it's still a small number. It's like 25 people a year killed by bee stings in the U.S., which is about twice as many who die from snake bite. But the main thing I think we're worried about, it happened in Washington State, and that's a couple of states away from the main place in the U.S. where we use honeybees to pollinate most of our cash crops. So if it does get to California's Central Valley,
right,
and they start wasting the honeybee hives in the Central Valley of California, you can literally expect the price of a lot of the vegetables and fruits that you eat to go up.
No more wine.
A lot of that stuff relies on honeybees specifically as pollinators. Now, we have native bees that are pollinators, but in the Central Valley of California, it's so managed and so kind of destroyed, and it's so heavily dependent on pesticides that honeybees are really the only ticket. So if these things start to affect honeybee populations in California, it's going to affect our economy in the long run. And so it really is kind of a time to panic, but not from a human health perspective. It's an invasive species, and so are honeybees, by the way. They're not native to the U.S. either. It's a domestic animal. Yeah. Our native bees we'll talk about a little bit too, because honeybees in many cases can compete with our native bees. But, for this one specific example in Central California, it's an important thing. And it's an invasive species either way, and the time is right now to make sure that they don't gain a foothold in North America. So in terms of panic, that's the impetus should be to go in there and annihilate these things before they take over. Because at a certain point, when these things have gained a foothold, you can't eradicate them. It's just impossible. And they just got there, so now's the time to do it. So they really should be going there and finding every one of these things and making sure they don't gain a foothold. Because if they do, we're going to be stuck with them.
Is there any hints on how they got there? They just buy a plane ticket? And
pretty much. I think it's pretty likely they get rides in big crates, those big containers, right, with all kinds of crops and things like that.
Right.
And so they've already established in southwestern Spain and Europe. They've been there for a while, and they're past the point where they're expecting to be able to eradicate them. So Europe is pretty much stuck with them now. So they missed the opportunity to go in there and nuke them when they first showed up. And we're there right now. So in that sense, it is kind of a panic mode thing. We need to go in there. We need to try to get rid of them. So tell us a little bit more about honeybees and native bees.
Well, I have one more question about the murder hornet here.
Okay.
So you mentioned the importance of eradicating the hornets, but I think a lot of people who are watching the news, they might be compelled to go out and kill other things that kind of look like this hornet. Yeah. Could you describe exactly what this hornet looks like, how to distinguish it from like a yellow jacket or a common hornet that we find here in the States? And also kind of give the listeners this message. I doubt it'll get out here to West Texas, right? But
it might. If it's in Spain, it might be able to survive here. Anywhere where there's honeybees, I'll bet they could probably manage.
Yeah. So the point being, don't go out and start killing wasps.
And I don't want, when I'm saying the panic thing and we should go in there and nuke them, I'm not saying you should go nuke them. Like the common average. I'm talking about like the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
I was that kind of thing. I was like, I got nuked in my yeah, I got right on the door.
Okay, good call. So, describe what a murder hornet looks like.
All right, so the main thing is the size. So murder hornets are about 2 inches long, and so most people's thumbs, so the width of the very first kind of section of your thumb, where you bend it, if you put two of those together, that's about how big.
Big and wide, right?
Big
pretty
and
big.
Wide can be. Yeah.
And do we have any wasps or hornets that get that size or even come close?
We do. We have the tarantula hawk. We have things like sand wasps that can get quite large.
I think the main native one I'm thinking of that gets pretty close to the size that people might end up seeing is the cicada killer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I don't really know that much about them, but they look a lot like a hornet. And instead of like the tarantula hawk, where it goes after big tarantulas to feed its young, the cicada killer goes around harvesting cicadas, those things you hear buzzing during the desert heat, in the middle of the day. And they grab cicadas, sting them, shove them in a hole with their larvae, like the tarantula hawk. And they're kind of this yellowish, kind of golden orange look, and they can be about at least an inch long, maybe even like an inch and a half. So
we've got pretty sizable ones in the collection for sure. The best way to recognize a cicada killer is probably the patterning that's on the body. So they tend to have very distinctive markings that you can look up. So if you were to just kind of Google a cicada killer and put an Asian hornet next to it, you could probably tell the difference pretty quickly just by the banding patterns.
And there are a lot of collections are putting out cool little diagrams and actual pictures from collections of all the lookalikes next to each other. Yeah. And so the Auburn University Museum, I noticed they had a cicada killer, yellow jacket queens, which I didn't even know yellow jackets had a really giant looking queen, which is pretty crazy. I just know the soldiers or whatever are they're not anywhere near the size of a cicada killer or an Asian giant hornet, but the queens are. There's already a European hornet that got here a long time ago that's not native, that people see a lot, and people could get it confused for the Asian hornet. It looks practically just like it, but it's smaller. Really? So, there's a lot of resources out there if you're like super concerned about it or just interested. Seek out some of that information, because when you see the lineup, you can really get an appreciation for how big this bad boy is.
And don't start murdering hornets and wasps. No, because they are important. They serve a pretty important function. And
do you want to describe before our first break a little about the functions of them and the benefits?
Yeah, what do hornets and wasps do?
Because whenever you walk in and you see that hive there, and they're starting to build their little family and their little legacy up there, you just immediately want to just take them down. Or with dirt daubers too. Whenever you see those little clunks of dirt up in the corner of your awning of your house, well, what should they do? What benefits do they provide for people?
Right. So a lot of your wasps are actually also pollinators. They're not as efficient as, say, things like bees, mostly due to the amount of hair that's on the body. So really, bees are basically just really furry wasps. And so they're really good at picking up pollen. A lot of your wasps can also pick up pollen. They're just not as efficient. So they are also technically pollinators. They also are a good source of biological control for other insects, since they do go out and pick up prey and use it to feed their young. So if you've got an invasion of some pests you don't like in your yard, like maybe you're an arachnophobe and you hate spiders, then spider wasps are your best friend, because they will take care of those spiders for you.
Oh, nice.
So they do have a lot of beneficial uses in our environment, for sure.
All right. So, they're important. Don't go swatting at them or trying to squish them. They're serving a purpose out there, even though they look terrifying and they could sting you. Think before you zap them with a can of Raid, right?
Yeah. So we got about a minute left on this, and I know after the break, are we going to get to tarantula hawks?
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of
my favorite.
I think we'll get into our native bees a lot, but I think it might be worth reiterating from biological control perspective. One thing I thought of is that this Asian hornet, if it actually got rid of European honeybees in the U.S., and then went extinct, it actually would be a very good thing for our native bees. It's kind of the ultimate biological control for honeybees. And I'm not that big of a fan of honeybees. We have a ton of really beautiful, really cool, effective pollinators that are native. And there's some evidence that honeybees actually cause declines in our native bee fauna. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, though, this is a great thing because they're going to come in here and wipe out the invasive European honeybee, which is what we have, because we don't know what else it might do. It might then just go and start switching and killing all of our native bees. So I say it's not worth the gamble. We got to go in there. The appropriate trained people got to go in there and get this thing taken care of before it does take off, because we don't know what it could do. And we're going to talk more about all of those really cool native bees in our next segment. So stick around, Science Nights in the Morning.
So welcome back. We are talking about Asian hornets and also invasive species, and like wasps. So you're talking about hawks, like tarantula hawks, and Conley's weird obsession with that. So Lauren, please tell us more about this tarantula hawks and how they hunt and whatever they do. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us more about tarantula hawks and how do they hunt.
Okay, so the tarantula hawk, genus Pepsis, is a type of wasp that's very large, very beautiful, blue, shiny, iridescent coloring, these really bright orange wings. And their life cycle begins with the female paralyzing a poor tarantula. So it'll take its ovipositor that's full of venom and inject that paralyzing agent into a tarantula. And in the process of trying to wrangle this tarantula, they tend to do kind of this hypnotic dance to try to kind of distract the tarantula. So that's an interesting kind of property that some people think might be why they have these interesting shiny orange wings. So after they've injected the paralyzing agent, they will bring it, usually shove it underneath a dark rock of some sort. And then they will...
Still alive, right?
Still alive, so paralyzed.
Yeah.
So still alive, but cannot move. It's pretty wild. And will lay a single egg on top of the tarantula. And then after a while, it will fly away, kind of try to cover its tracks so nothing else will go into that hole, because there are things like hyperparasitoids, for example, that will go in and try to use that paralyzed tarantula for their own purposes to rear their own young. So after that happens, the egg hatches into larvae, which burrow through the exoskeleton of that poor tarantula and kind of eat it from the inside out. So they burrow through and then start to eat the insides of the tarantula
while it's alive.
While it's still alive.
While it's still, if that's not metal, I don't know what is.
Sounds like
that is metal.
Sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's like Iron Maiden t-shirt.
That is not metal for the poor tarantula.
And after that,
it's not. It's not metal for the poor tarantula tree.
and then after that, once the the larvae have eaten everything that they want out of the tarantula, so they depleted the host completely, they will leave the tarantula and pupate, and then they will turn into their full-fledged adults.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is too cool.
They're pretty common around here. You can see them all around West Texas. And Thomas, you've actually seen these things in action. I've seen plenty of tarantula hawks, but never actually seen one dragging its prey.
I've seen it twice. The first time I saw it, I basically saw the whole process other than the larvae burrowing into the tarantula. But the first time I saw it, this was down in South Texas. I was fishing on a resaca, and here walks this tarantula, and sure enough, I see the tarantula hawk nail it with its stinger, and I stopped fishing at that moment and just watched everything that happened. And it took a few seconds, and that tarantula did what spiders do when they die. It kind of flipped over and curled up, but, still alive. And I actually watched the tarantula hawk drag it into the grass. Now, I don't know if it pulled it down a hole or what, but, we can assume what happened after that. And then the second time, I kind of saw the later part of the process after the wasp had dispatched the tarantula. It was just kind of dragging it across. This was out here in West Texas. So, it's really alien. And it was a great show. It lasted about 10 minutes from the point of the wasp nailing the tarantula to when it was dragging it off, and it distracted me from fishing for a while, which is pretty unusual. But
that's a great occurrence. What are the chances you actually witness the whole process?
And twice.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And people freak out a lot about tarantula hawks, but what I think is kind of cool about them is that they're super unobtrusive when they're flying around or doing their thing. They're really calm. I've never had one. Some wasps and things will, occasionally they'll just kind of seemingly go out of their way and sting you. You're near their hive or whatever. Those things are just minding their own business, and they can be pretty. You can get pretty close to them, and they do not mess with you.
Yeah. They're curious too, which is funny.
They're really hard to piss off, which is kind of, and their sting is extremely painful.
Yeah.
There's YouTube's videos out there for you if you are into that sort of thing.
Yeah. On the pain scale, it's like one of the top numbers, right? In the world?
I can't remember, but we've all seen Coyote Peterson.
I think this is why the topic is so popular, is because of Coyote Peterson. This guy on YouTube who basically gets wasps and things to sting him, and he has a pain scale, and I think the bullet ant and the tarantula wasp are at the top of his pain scale, but
and that one's an interesting one because when he does the tarantula hawk, you can see how reluctant the tarantula hawk is. He's holding it with a pair of forceps and he's forcing it onto his arm. And it's just trying to get away, and it's even moving its abdomen like away from his arm. And then, like after like a good 25 seconds of hassling this thing, it's like, okay, jerk off.
Yeah,
and it nails.
Well,
it.
he did it wrong. He should have dressed up like a tarantula.
Right, he had the
That's what
wrong
he should have
costume
done.
instead of a moron.
Yeah.
He should have dressed up like a tarantula.
Should have gotten a special glove.
Yeah,
tarantula
a little tarantula glove there. Sweet. Well, this is great. Yeah, excellent.
So that gets your tarantula hawks fixed?
Yeah, I got my fix. It's definitely tarantula hawk's definitely my all-time favorite insect.
You brought up the mud dauber earlier. You know about those
dirt
guys?
dauber.
Yeah, dirt daubers.
Yeah.
They, for those of you guys listening, don't know what we're talking about. Any kind of shed out in the woods that you've ever seen in the eaves, up underneath rocks and things like that, big rock outcrops, you'll see those long tubes of what look like clay.
Yeah.
And these are from wasps that go around nailing. Have you ever actually dug one open to see what they're feeding on?
Yeah, they look like whenever you break one open, it's just a ton of little holes. It's so intricate. There's all these little.
What's in? Have you ever seen what's actually in the chambers?
Chicken nuggets, I think.
That's exactly right.
There's a special prize when you open it.
Yes,
little pieces of spider.
So tell them what's in those chambers, Lauren.
Oh, so inside those chambers are host provisions. So first, the mother wasp will shove spiders or whatever host provisions they have paralyzed into the nest chamber. Wow. And then they will lay an egg in there, and then that egg will hatch, and then they will consume the
It's usually spiders.
Inside.
If you want to know what kind of spiders are found locally around the area where I just go find dirt dauber, mud dauber colonies and just dig them open, and each one has got like a nasty spider in it.
Wow.
So these things are going around. They're pretty metal too, and they're going around, and they're not just getting one spider, right? Like a tarantula hawk, which is pretty cool because it's so enormous, right? They're going and harvesting, dozens of little spiders and chambering them up.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what Thomas saw, like a tarantula hawk dragging a huge, now it's a little bit more, I could see like, a dirt dauber taking a smaller spider, one of those smaller insects inside one of those smaller chambers.
It's about the same ratio proportionately.
Oh, really?
Because mud daubers are much smaller than a tarantula hawk.
Yeah. Well,
they get big old spiders.
They tend to get multiple spiders. So they go back and forth to put multiple spiders per each larvae they're trying to rear. So things like your shiny blue mud daubers tend to be very specific on things like black widows, so things in that family.
Oh, wow.
So if you've got those shiny, pretty, beautiful, iridescent blue mud daubers with the black wings, they're typically attacking
black
things
widows,
like
taking out black widows.
cedars.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, oh man.
See, black widows are creepy. I can handle a wasp.
And they're everywhere around here. Black widows
they're
are common.
I have to spray for them, sadly, but they'll get you. What's up, Honor Bond?
I cannot handle. No, I was just going to say I find centipedes and millipedes creepy in black widows.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Centipedes are pretty crazy. I saw a lot of those this weekend when I was hiking. There's a lot of millipedes and centipedes out.
Yeah, they come out when it starts to rain, it seems.
Yeah.
So what about more cool native spiders? What are your not spiders?
Wasps.
Wasp bees, hornets. What are your favorite Hymenopterans?
My favorites. I love the cuckoo wasp.
Ooh.
So cuckoo wasps are super interesting. They're these beautiful green, blue, iridescent, tiny little wasps that are also parasitoids.
Can you look that up, Conley?
Kleptoparasites.
I've never heard of this cuckoo wasp.
Parasitoids, you're going to have to tell our listeners what a parasitoid is, and then you're going to have to tell them what a kleptoparasite is.
Right. So a parasitoid is an insect that consumes the bodies of other insects, typically larvae, so the immature parts of the insect. So as part of their development, so they kill immature insects. So things like cuckoo wasps typically are what we call kleptoparasites. So these are insects that go into the hives of other insects and will kill the larvae in there and then eat all the provisions that were supposed to be for that larvae. So they steal the food of the
And that's not so the larvae, they drop off their larvae with other larval insects?
Yes.
And that's why it's like a cuckoo, because a cuckoo comes by and drops its eggs off with another bird's nest. And then do these colonial wasps that they're dropping them off with, or whatever kind of insect they're dropping off with, do they actually feed the little babies?
Well, so the ones that I've seen in my project that I did, I was looking at mostly solitary wasps. Mm-hmm. And so typically the cuckoo wasp would sneak in there when the mama wasp was gone and kind of dump her larvae in there.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And then does the other mom take care of the larvae?
No, because she's already provisioned.
So that way it's not like a cuckoo, but it's similar, I guess.
It's similar. They typically won't kill the other larvae that are in there. They just steal their provisions and basically outcompete the larvae that's in that nest.
And it sounds like a really pretty one.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Holy cow, that's a looker.
Yeah, very iridescent, many different colors, like you're describing, and quite cutie, little cutie there.
Yeah.
So.
The other bees I think of when I think of really pretty. That's the other thing I like about our native bees. What I don't know anything about these. You're gonna have to tell me about them. But the common name I always hear about them is the solitary bees.
Oh.
And these are really beautiful. They look a lot like a honeybee in terms of its overall kind of body proportions, but they come in all kinds of beautiful colors. There's like bottle yellow ones, green ones, and blue ones, and they're just gorgeous. And I don't know why they're called solitary bees, and I don't know anything about them. So here's your opportunity to teach me something.
Okay, so solitary wasps and bees are not your typical eusocial insects. So these are insects where there's a mating pair, so a mom and a dad, and they mate, and then the mom creates a nest, so a single nest. So she doesn't have all these worker bees or drones.
And that's like in the ground where she puts
in the ground a lot, and then also inside of twigs, inside of stems. So some will hollow out wood for their nests. A lot of the diversity we have out here is actually in the ground. So we have a lot of ground nesting bees and wasps that will dig these nests into the ground and then create little pockets in the ground, and that's where they put each one of their host young, and then bring the provisions inside of there. And
are they raising up a huge brood of a bunch of babies, or just like a couple?
Anywhere between typical brood might be 4 to 12.
Okay,
of these,
so way less like none of these humongous hives like a honeybee with all these. So much more kind of almost like the way we do it as mammals. Just a mating pair and a few young. So the solitary bees, ground nesters, maybe sticking their larvae in little plant material, are those kind of our primary native bees in the U.S.?
Mostly, yeah.
Do they belong to like a unique family?
There's a number of different families. So the most common ones that we have out here are probably halictid bees. So those are those pretty metallic ones you're talking about that are green and blue. And these are also called like sweat bees, might be a term that you're used to hearing. So those are probably our most prolific family.
What's the diversity like in the U.S.? Do we have like a huge number of unique bees in the U.S.? Like we have a lot of other things? Right.
So out in the southwest deserts of the U.S., it's typically considered one of the largest biodiversities of your bees. So native bees, specifically straight nesting bees and their parasitoids. So we live in a region that has a lot of diversity for bees.
I feel like we really need to get the word out about our native bees because they're gorgeous and they do a lot of cool things. I don't know that much about them. And every now and then you'll see like this poster that's like native bees, and it's just beautiful. They're all so gorgeous, and I can honestly say I don't think I've ever been stung by a native bee. Like they're a lot more innocuous even than like honeybees, which are pretty innocuous. They don't really do that much either. But they're pretty harmless and just beautiful, almost more like a fly the way they operate. You know, if you go and look in a cactus and watch one in bloom, that's a good way to see one. You'll see these native bees going in and out of cactus flowers, and you'll see how beautiful they are. One thing that I thought was really cool, somebody did a comparison of native bees as pollinators versus honeybees as pollinators in the eastern U.S. Mm-hmm. And the eastern U.S. is destroyed, right? There's pastures, there's little tree lots, there's hardly any native vegetation that's not impacted. And it turns out in places like Pennsylvania and New Jersey, native bees, even though it's destroyed, can just as effectively pollinate all of our crops as honeybees. So kind of getting to that idea that the honeybees, like when people talk about conservation of bees, they're almost always talking about this non-native domestic bee that we imported from Europe. Mm-hmm. And the fear is, colony collapse disorder. What happens to our bees? And no one ever talks about our native bees. In the Central Valley of California, honeybees are the thing. They move them around in trucks. They do all the work, and it's very important work. And your vegetables and fruits would skyrocket in price if people had to go around pollinating those flowers. But in other areas of the country, our native bees can do the job. We don't need honeybees, which I thought was really cool. A lot of times honeybee proponents will say, no, the honeybee does it best and we need to keep them around. It's like, no, in some areas, even places that are heavily human modified, destroyed, like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, our native bees can still do the work, which is pretty cool.
Well, here's a question. So another economic concern with that is if we did away with the honeybees, you mentioned that a lot of the native bees are, what's the term you use, asocial or solitary? Are there any native bees that are colonial, like honeybees? Because the name honeybee, we harvest honey from them as well, so we don't just use them as pollinators.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Would we be totally out of honey if we got rid of the honeybees, or is there a native species that would actually do the same thing?
Not one that I'm aware of. So the mechanisms that the most native bees use pollen and eat nectar is very different than what honeybees do. So honeybees take up that nectar and they make honey with it to provision their young. Most of your native bees are taking that nectar and pollen as their own food source, and then also using pollen to create the food for their young.
Yeah.
And so typically with honeybees, the concern is with their effects on native bees is that honeybees will go to a flower and they will take every single last tiny bit of nectar that's in that flower. They suck it all up because honey is a really energetic, expensive thing to make. And so they need all the nectar that they can get. And what that means is that there's pretty much nothing left for our native pollinators. So native pollinators like whipped bees actually don't take all the nectar or all the pollen when they go to flower. And that's what allows that balance to remain between all the different types of species that we have. But honeybees will just take everything, all the nectar and all the provisions. And so that's affecting their decline.
Yeah, it's a good point because we don't necessarily want a world without honey either. But I think the balance you mentioned is a good thing. It's almost like, cattle. Cattle can destroy ecosystems in the West. If you do it right, it doesn't have to. It'd be a good thing to have a balance where you had like native herbivores like bison that were more on the menu, to where we could have our cake and eat it too. So there's areas where honeybees don't seem to influence the native bee populations very much, and where they can probably both coexist. And there's other areas where they severely impact them. I think the Southwest is one of the areas they're particularly worried about because there's so much diversity of native bees, and there's so little, to go around, so little resources for all those bees to compete for. And of course, there's places like the Central Valley of California where it's so destroyed that you can't have native bees. They just don't. They can't. They use so many pesticides there that there's basically no native bees in the Central Valley of California, and that's a place where you basically have to have honeybees to get the work done. So I think these are all cool issues that we're bringing up that hopefully, I doubt that many of our listeners have ever heard any of this stuff, which is pretty exciting.
No, it's the first time I'm really hearing about it. So it's a fascinating world out there.
Even I did not know there was this difference between native pollinators and honeybees. I had already assumed that honeybees were like all over the world kind of thing.
Yeah,
they're not like
honeybees are all over the world. They've been transported all over the world. Where they're native, in Europe and Asia, these are kind of totally different issues that we would talk about in their native range. But it's important to recognize that honeybees are a domestic animal in the same sense that cows are. They've undergone hundreds of years of domestication to be the way they are. And so it makes them pretty different, especially in North America. Like you were saying, Lauren, there was not really a big colonial bee like that did the same thing. And we're going to keep talking about this cool stuff. We hope you like it. We're going to wrap up this segment and talk more about our native bees after this break.
All right, everybody, what is going on? We are back. Special guest Lauren is in the house with Dr. Sondran, Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee, and Dr. Thomas Schiller. And I had a question for you, Lauren. A long time ago, I got in 4-H a little entomology pin that I got to wear, and I was very proud of it. My sister has one too. She still wears it right now. She's probably wearing it right now. But anyway, so the instructor that gave us that pin was very, very offended whenever I would call an insect a bug. And
why would you even do that?
I know.
You're making me nauseous.
It's terrible, isn't
Can't
it?
believe this.
It's absolutely ludicrous.
Sickens my stomach.
Even like Bugs Bunny, and the next step is just selling Bugs Bunny is the same thing as a bug.
Yeah,
Come
yeah.
on. Even the calling, where does it stop?
What's up, Doc? But I mean, that brings me to my question. Is there a difference between a bug and an insect, or are they like, I don't know. What are they?
Oh, so technically, scientifically speaking, they are not interchangeable, insect and bug. So insect refers to everything that is in class Insecta, so all your different types of insects. And then technically, the only bugs there are true bugs, which is a particular order of insects. So all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs.
Interesting. So like the bugs in A Bug's Life, the Pixar film.
I'm not sure there's actually any...
They're all insects, right?
Right.
That's a good question.
Actually,
are there any bugs?
I don't think there are.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't think so.
It's funny. She talks. When I emailed her about this, I think she said that we're going to talk about bugs, and so she's not the uber nerd who would get offended by that. And I'm the same way. Like when people talk, I talk about critters. I'm going to go find critters when I'm looking for snakes, and I think that's fine.
Right. Yeah,
that's a polyphyletic term.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a lot of snobs out there.
Actually,
snobbed a lot.
critters are only a specific genus of creepy crawlies. So. Yeah,
creepy crawlies being a monophyletic group.
Yes.
Oh, exactly. Trust me. And being on the radio, I get calls all the time of people get highly offended at that.
Yeah, hopefully there's no one out there listening who's going to be offended.
One day we're going to get big enough to where we're going to have these people, all the time.
Have a coalition against us, trying to bring us down.
Yeah, we need an automated response. It's like, thank you for your thoughtful question. We will be getting back to you soon.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we have about 10 minutes left to... We've talked a lot about murder hornets. We've talked a lot about the big flying insects out there and their benefits, right, to us. Now, just one quick question that I'm sure our listeners have, because we have a lot of folks out there, they're outside mowing the lawn. They're just taking care of their house, and if they see like something just hanging off the awning and they don't want to kill the insects, are there ways to go around that?
Relocate them?
Yeah, can they relocate them?
Is probably the best option.
There's I want to tell you guys about a great trick. Everybody should know about this. This is what I do. I'm the person responsible for getting rid of nasty wasps and bugs.
Killing spiders.
And I don't kill them. And what you need is a Dixie cup or a glass and a piece of paper. And there's a smooth move you can do. You grab the Dixie cup or the glass and you put it over the perpetrator. And then you slide the piece of paper between the perpetrator and the glass, underneath the glass. And it'll just lift its little legs up and it'll be between. And then you got this piece of paper between you and the suspect. And then you walk out into your front yard and you just let it go. And then you walk back inside.
Well, what I was thinking and imagining is this bright, big, beautiful hive with a whole bunch of eggs in there, a wasp nest, right?
Like where the wasp has already set up residence and so I just making children. Right, I
take my garden shears and I shear the edge of it, and then I take it, and they're like all following me, and we're all friendly together, and we're symbiotic within this realm.
Then you pound some Benadryl.
All you need then is you just scale up my system. You need a pickle bucket.
Okay.
And a cardboard box.
Okay.
And then you can do the same thing.
But I have to put a nail or duct tape it up.
What I would say is I did this. A wasp was making a nest on top of a bottle that I was going to take to recycle.
Oh, cool.
And it was right next to where we park our cars. And I thought, I'm not going to do anything. And that's an important thing for people to start to get used to doing. I think live and let live. It's amazing when you... And I know it's a whole different ballgame if you got children, because children are more vulnerable. So, some black widows may or may not have gotten a death sentence at the Hacienda del Graham recently. But when it's something like a wasp, and this thing, I just said, you know what? It's starting its little nest there. I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to take that bottle to the recycling, and I'm going to pass by it every single day in my truck. And I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to let it, and it never stings you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important part, is that people, it's the same thing with rattlesnakes, mountain lions, all those things. If you can learn to live and let live, it's an amazing level of enjoyment for nature that you can start to have. Instead of like what we talk about, where you bring these city kids from Houston out to the desert for the first time and a fly goes past their nose.
And they jump off a cliff.
And they lose their minds and start doing the boogie, the fly swat boogie.
Yeah, I think more people probably injure themselves trying to get away from wasps and things that might sting them than just letting them.
You can always tell the students who've never been outside by the fly swat boogie.
Yeah, even ones that have been outside. I've had senior level geology students who've been hiking for years, and they see a little wasp. It's like a phobia almost. They see a little wasp fly up and they just scream and go running off. And
well, there's some kind of traumatic event that may have happened. Have y'all ever been stung by?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Y'all been all stung.
Honeybees.
How many times at one time? In one setting?
Once.
Just one.
I got probably stung 6 times in the head by yellow jackets. Because I was standing on their nest.
Oh, you're standing.
They're in the ground, so they come spilling out, and you're looking around where the hell they're coming from, and you're standing on their nest, and that's where they're coming from.
Yeah. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I think maybe 3 or 4 times by a yellow jacket. I was crawling to get a ball underneath my grandpa's porch and got nailed.
When you were a kid.
Yeah, behind the knee. It was not pleasant.
No.
Yeah, every single day going into school, I'd always get stung on the neck like a good amount of time. Always have to miss the first day of school, and then just recently, I got stung about 3 or 4 years ago. Got stung 24 times. I did run. I hit a hole, shattered my ankle, had 2 years of rehab.
Whoa, see?
Yeah. So it's like trauma.
Yeah.
The escape was worse than that.
It was a lot worse. I won't do that again. I'll just get stung.
The thing I've discovered when it comes to wasps, bees, whatever, it may be tempting, especially if it's something like a yellow jacket that's buzzing in your face and is a very aggressive looking thing, to swat at it. But especially with bees, I've found if you just stay still and go about what you're doing, even if the thing lands on you, try not to freak out, because the second you swat at it, and I think with bees they release like a pheromone or something, right, that will tell all the other bees it's time to attack and defend the hive.
Wow.
And we almost got into some trouble out at Peña Mountain in the national park. Had a group of 8 students, and one of them sat on a bee. And the rest of the bees came in and basically ended our day in the field because of this one student who was swatting at the bees. But anyway, that's what I always tell my students, is just don't mess with them. They're mean looking, but try not to swat at them and they won't mess with you, right?
Yeah. Honorbon, have you ever been stung?
I've been stung once when I was 3 or 4 years old. I remember it pretty vividly. And it's pretty funny because I was at a wedding, and I thought this thing that was sitting on one of my uncle's back was a mosquito. So I thought, this is a really big mosquito, so I should slap it off.
I'm just imagining little baby Honorbon. Oh, this is a good idea. Swat.
Yeah, that's right, a swat. And I remember my thumb swelling up really, really big, and somebody taking the sting out of it, and that's all I remember. I don't remember what it was that stung me, but I definitely know it was either a wasp or a hornet or something.
So I have a question. So we can. I've thought of a good way to end this on a positive note, since we just have a couple of minutes. What's everyone's favorite bug? I'm going to use the term bug. Okay, favorite insect.
Bug.
Let's start with you, Conley. What's your favorite?
Oh, y'all already know that.
Tarantula wasp.
It's a tarantula.
All right. What about you, Honorbon?
Bug. Firefly.
Firefly. Beautiful. Yeah, it's a good.
Yeah, firefly.
All right, Dr. Graham.
Hawk moths, the sphinx moths, are incredible.
Good choice.
They're really cool. I call them, they're glorified and honorary vertebrates. They're so cool.
They're quite big.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm familiar with those. Are they
They're these huge moths that they look like hummingbirds when they're flying.
And they have the eyes on the wings?
We're looking at a photo of them.
Usually not.
Yeah, they're not like those. And they have humongous long tongues for pollinating, like orchids and
That's
things.
different than Luna moths?
Yeah, they're different from lunas.
They do kind of look like hawks or something.
Yeah.
Like
A lot of times you see them, they look like a hummingbird. They'll come out, the day flyers fly around flowers during the day, and they look just like hummingbirds. They have the same kind of abilities as hummingbirds in terms of the wing beat. It's incredible.
Wow.
And even some of them are, they're essentially endothermic. The wings get them warm enough to where they can maintain a constant and warm body temperature, and that's how they can sustain that flight. So that's
awesome.
They're the only, for a while, they were the only kind of animals that could actually see color at night.
Wow.
But actually now we know some geckos can do that too, so they don't have that superlative. But they've got a lot of superlatives. They're pretty neat. What about yours? And then we'll end with Lauren's.
My favorite is the mantis wasp.
Oh, those are great.
Those are really cool. And I'm going to leave some time for Lauren because I think she can probably give some more details about her favorite. Or she might have to think about it a little bit.
No, I might.
Check it out. Mantis wasp.
Oh, nice. The Neuropteran. So a nerve wing insect that pretends to look like a mantis but is not a mantis or related to a mantid. So those are cool. My favorite insect is the bee fly. That's what my master's degree was over. And bee flies are those types of flies that look a lot like bees, so you might mistake them for a fuzzy bumblebee. But actually, they parasitize a lot of different insects, including bees. So they are parasitoids, like we mentioned earlier, so insects that feed on the larvae of other insects. And my project was focused on their relationships with our native bees and wasp populations and seeing what their effect was. So they're very cute.
Yeah, they look like a Pixar character.
Yeah, they really do.
There's a Pokemon based off them as well.
Oh, really?
So if you want to look that up.
They're real furry and real cuddly. You just want to kind of
pollinators too, right?
They are, yes.
So Lauren, right before we head out, can you tell people about like a local event around here that if people are interested in insects, they might be able to attend in the near future?
So out here, usually during the spring at the Tuolin Desert Research Institute, on your way towards Fort Davis, usually late April or early April or late March, we do a Bugs program that's in conjunction with Saros Biology Club. And it's an event where third graders and fourth graders get to come to the Nature Center, and we teach them all about different insects and bugs. So it's pretty.
So yeah,
sounds educational.
When apocalypse is over, look forward to the next bugs next spring. Thank you so much for being here, Lauren.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Great work. Stuff. And we will be back next Saturday with a new topic on Science Nights in the Morning, every Saturday morning, 10 a.m., KVLF Alpine.